Welcome back to another episode of What's Up, Prof? Hello, Walter.
Hi, Martin.
What's with this new dress code of yours?
Man, I thought I'd become mustardy so I can start rolling up my sleeves.
Get ready.
Get ready. I think there's a shaking coming.
That's true. So, before we get to the shaking, let's ask the Lord to bless this discussion. Our Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us together. Lord, important things have to be discussed, and we ask that you bless our minds and also enlighten us in the way that you want the discussion to go. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. You know, what's interesting to me is the way in which these discussions develop. You know, I'm sure some people have the notion that we sit like bookworms and prepare word for word what we are going to say, when mostly we haven't got a clue
That's
what we're going to say. And we just go and pray and say, Lord, there's so much. What do you do? How do you filter these things out? And what is essential for the time in which we are living? And the war is definitely heating up, and some of it is of a nature that you wouldn't expect, right? So let's try and be kind and nevertheless be straightforward when it comes to these things.
Yes, you see, we're not doing the cutting.
The word must do the cutting. The truth must do the
That's
cutting.
the thing. So if we bring out the word and this, what's said in the spirit of prophecy, it's not to be vengeful.
No.
It's to try and bring it to the fore, like you've mentioned in the episodes before, to bring out a discussion.
Yes. Now today we have two books here as usual, and normally my Bible is also lying here. But today I brought the Testimonies for the Church. And I've been reading this one again, I don't know for the how manyth time. But it gets to be a very interesting situation. And, you know, we're talking about many issues here. One of the things that I read about in here was about the rebellion of Korah and how serious that was and how disillusioned they were. Korah, Dathan and Abiram.
Yeah.
They didn't even know that they were on the wrong side of the issue. And even after God's retributive action, where they were swallowed up, the people were still convinced that this was a sinister plot by Moses to get rid of them.
Yeah.
Although, logically, how could he open up the ground and swallow them up, right?
Yeah.
And it was only through the intercession of Moses that a tremendous plague was stayed.
That just shows you how strong the influence of misinformation can be.
Yeah.
Now, which testimonies to the church do you have there?
Martin, this one over here is Testimonies to the Church, Volume 3. But what is interesting to me is that she has a few interesting things to say about reproof for the church and what the problem was with these people. For example, why they were so upset about what had happened to Korah and company. She states that the people were totally confused on the issue. Their minds had been thoroughly poisoned with disaffection. And they had the matter fixed beyond a question in their minds that Moses and Aaron were wicked men. So it's quite easy to see how people can think that those that stand for truth and rebuke sin are actually the wicked ones, right?
It is. Because most of the time, they that do it are not popular with what's going on in the world.
Correct. And that they were responsible for the death of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, who they thought would have been the saviors of the Hebrews by bringing in a better order of things, where praise would take place of reproof. Isn't that interesting?
Very interesting.
And peace, the place of anxiety and conflict. And they accused them. They said, ye have killed the people of the Lord. Now, these are stories written for us and for the time that we are living in. And those that say things such as Korah and Abiram and those said should be very, very careful how they approach these things. She says here on page 360, God would have his people disciplined and brought into harmony of action, that they may see eye to eye and be of the same mind and of the same judgment. If you look at the church today, that is impossible, right?
Yeah.
In order to bring about this state of things, there is much to be done. The carnal heart must be subdued and transformed. God has designs that there shall ever be a living testimony in the church. And then at the end of page 361, she says, God designs that his people shall be a unit.
Yeah.
And they shall see eye to eye and be of the same mind and of the same judgment.
Mm-hmm.
With every wind of doctrine blowing in the church today, are we of the same mind? No. This cannot be accomplished without a clear, pointed, living testimony in the church. The prayer of Christ was that his disciples might be one as he was one with the Father. And then she quotes the Bible text where Jesus says that particular prayer. Now, Martin, I have said from the beginning, and I'm sure that you agree, that the only way in which we can become one in mind and purpose is if we base our theology and our thinking on the same criteria.
That's it. Your basis, your anchor should be the same.
And therefore, the Bible and the spirit of prophecy must become the basis. Anything that deviates from it, anything that twists it, distorts it, changes its direction, sets the train on another spoor.
That's it.
Anything of that nature will lead to disharmony. Only as we combine to the law and to the testimony can we become one.
And it's also important that the part that says to the law has to come from the right law. It cannot be based on spurious manuscripts.
That is true. You know, we've had many of these discussions, and I mean, the issue of Bible translations is a major headache for many people. Now, in the modern translations, it is impossible to defend some of our doctrines.
And even some of the spirit of prophecy statements. So that's what makes it so difficult.
Correct. And if you take the time frames, let's say, of the Septuagint, they differ substantially from the Masoretic text. Now, which one are you going to rely on? To the law and to the testimony. So the spirit of prophecy is in harmony with the Masoretic text, but it is definitely what time frames are where time frames are concerned, not in harmony with the Septuagint, right? So I don't know why this is such a huge issue, because it's really not rocket science. But let's not go in that direction, because this gets many feathers ruffled.
Yeah.
Let's look at some of the other very important issues, to the law and to the testimony. Nothing against the truth, but for the truth. We want to continue that study.
Yeah.
And we'll mingle it with, again, some of the experiences that we have had and that I've had, and see where we can find some substance to base our faith on. The straight testimony called forth by the counsel of the true witness to the Laodiceans is something that is not very popular.
No.
No, as we read, Korah's company said, all the people are holy. Don't make a distinction between those that do this and don't do that, right? We're all holy. We're all God's chosen people. Yes, God chose the whole world.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that the whole world accepts him, right?
No, there's certain criteria you have to adhere to.
Now the Pope, and this is a fascinating statement that he made in 2019 already, the Pope says Christians should never seek to convert unbelievers. Anyone who proselytizes is not a disciple of Jesus. It's an amazing statement. Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel and make disciples.
This statement is directly opposed to that.
It's amazing. In a dialogue with Catholic high school students in Rome this weekend, Pope Francis responded to a question about how to deal with atheists and people of other faiths by saying that Christians should never proselytize, and any who do are not true Christians. That's incredible, right? Notable remarks illustrating the Pope's view on evangelism, including, speaking of having Jewish and Muslim friends, we are all the same, all children of God. Correct. Everybody on this whole earth is a child of God. But not everybody wants to be a child of God.
True.
Right? It didn't occur to me, and it doesn't have to be like saying to a boy or a girl, you are Jewish, you are a Muslim, come, be converted. We are not in the times of the Crusades. In front of an unbeliever, the last thing I have to do is to try to convince him. Never. But listen, never, never bring the gospel by proselytizing. If someone says they are a disciple of Jesus and comes to you with proselytism, they are not a disciple of Jesus. The church does not grow by proselytism. Last year, Pope Francis told a grieving boy that his late father was in heaven despite the fact that he was an atheist because he had his children baptized. It's really an amazing statement. This goes directly against Jesus' instruction.
Yeah.
Now, I've had quite a number of experiences that I might want to share in this regard within our own church. Many, many years ago, I was a speaker at a camp meeting, and there was another speaker, a prominent American preacher, who was the other speaker. And as often the case, I find myself in these terrible situations. I'm always in trouble, where my message was the exact opposite of his message. What do you do in a case like that? And you ask yourself, why, Lord? But you know, if I think back in history, always, whenever there was a major event that was to take place, twin messages went into the world.
Yeah.
Right? One based on error, one based on truth. Sometimes twin messages, both based on error. But God is fair, and he always allows a choice. So in 1844, the message went out from Charles Darwin, we are the product of evolution. In 1844, a message went out to the world, worship God and give him the glory.
That's it.
For the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made, the opposite of the evolution. Two messages.
Yeah.
Which one is popular in the world?
The one that says we come from a bowl of slime.
Absolutely. So you have these twin messages. There are many, many examples. And I don't want to run ahead of myself, but in some future WhatsApps, we will discuss some very interesting twin messages that have gone out into the world. And the world embraces on a regular basis that which is not biblical.
Yeah.
But we'll come to that at a later point. So this man, at this camp meeting, he was preaching about the view that we have to reach the whole world with the gospel message. And this gospel will be preached in the whole world, right? And then the end will come. And his basic understanding was that God winks at the time of ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore it is presumption to assume that you have to reach a nation, let's say China, with the gospel. If you don't preach to them, his view was that they're all saved, because they don't have to make a choice then. Whereas if you do preach to them, they might make the wrong choice and be lost. Yeah. So you will be responsible for their demise. That was his basic message. So stop this nonsense of preaching to the world. Just leave them. It's exactly what the Pope is saying here.
Yep.
Exactly the same thing. And I was sweating bullets when I was listening to this. And there were literally thousands of people at the camp meeting. Thousands. I don't want to give the figures, but it was thousands. It was a big camp meeting. And I had to follow that act. I was the next preacher for the next sermon. And I thought to myself, what am I going to do? What am I going to say? How am I going to address this issue? Or am I just going to leave it and let the people decide for themselves? And I got onto the pulpit, and before I could stop myself, it just popped out. Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel. Pandemonium. So I had an enemy for life. At many years later, or not so many years later, a few years later, I was in the United States and I was going to preach to his church. And I wasn't going to preach to the adults. I was going to preach to the youth. And that was an amazing experience, because it was obvious that they weren't very keen on having me there, but somehow I'd been invited. How does that happen? Huh? You can do nothing against the truth, but for the truth. Somehow I ended up at this youth church. And the pastor arrived on the stage with his shirt unbuttoned to here, with an electric guitar around his neck and an earring in his ear. Which is very strange, right? And he basically said that I was one of the speakers, but I wasn't going to get more than 10 minutes.
Oh, this seems to be a trend.
10 minutes is a trend, yes.
And a band that goes previous to you.
Correct. So there was a lot of, what should we call it, Martin? Shall we call it music going on? And a lot of gesticulation. And eventually I did get my 10 minutes. And I told my story, but I sometimes have a streak in me that God is still working on. So I told my story in such a fashion that I brought it to a short crescendo, but didn't give the outcome. And said, sorry, my time's up, I can't tell you what happened. And the whole audience said, no, you must carry on. And I said, no, your pastor said there's no way that I can carry on. I have 10 minutes and that's it. Bottom line, I spoke for 1.5 hours. So sometimes these things happen. The doors are open and sometimes the doors are closed. And he also had a very interesting sermon. This is now the main preacher. He had a very interesting sermon also about, well, he was talking about a king who had made decrees, etc. And basically, it was very similar to some of the sermons that I heard. You don't prune a tree. You must allow the tree to grow just as it wants to. pruning is a very painful experience. And that's exactly what the people were saying.
But that's exactly what the Bible tells you to do.
Yeah, and what the people were saying about Korah.
That's
He wasn't going to prune the tree. It was going to be a better situation. Moses was a tree pruner. He must stop this nonsense. Don't tell us what to do. The whole congregation is holy, right? So this kind of thinking is not only in the papacy. This kind of thinking, of course, is necessary for the papacy.
Yes.
Absolutely, right? Because he doesn't want another Reformation
No.
where he loses a large proportion of his church.
And he wants, we've spoken about it before, that the papacy basket can catch all the fish.
Yes, it is perfectly suited to save those that are in their sins and those that want to be saved by their works. So it can embrace most of the human society. This kind of thinking is an exceedingly dangerous way of thinking, and it should have no place within Seventh-day Adventism.
What do you do with the verse that says, their blood be on your head if you don't tell them?
Exactly. And if you go to the stories of the Bible, let's just go there, and then we'll tell some more serious stories of what can happen to us. Now, when we go to the Bible and we see what happened there, and we go to what happened to the disciples, we read all about it in the book of Acts, how often they were arrested for speaking in the name of Jesus, right? Which the Pope just said you shouldn't do that, right?
Yeah.
You go to Acts chapter 4, and as they spoke unto the people, the priests and the captains of the temple and the Sadducees came upon them, being grieved that they taught the people and preached through Jesus the resurrection from the dead. In other words, they preached a doctrine, which wasn't a very comfortable doctrine. It's also not a very comfortable doctrine for the papacy, because the dead are all happily either in heaven or in purgatory or damned in hell already, right? And they laid hands on them and put them in hold unto the next day, for it was now eventide. Howbeit, many of them which had heard the word believed. And the number of the men was about 5,000. So that was very successful preaching, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that the Pope would have been happy. He would have been right at the spearhead of that crowd of priests and captains and Sadducees that came to arrest these people, right?
Yeah, and it's the small theological committee that came out and took these guys laid hands on them.
Absolutely. And it came to pass on the morrow that the rulers and elders and scribes and Annas the high priest and Caiaphas and John and Alexander and as many as were of the kindred of the high priest were gathered together at Jerusalem. I find it interesting that some of these names are mentioned, and they're not mentioned in a positive light, right? And when they had sat them in the midst, they asked, by what power or what name have ye done this? Because they had healed a man, right? In the name of Jesus. Then Peter, filled with the Holy Ghost, said unto them, ye rulers of the people and elders of Israel, if we this day be examined for the good deed done to the impotent man, by what means is he made whole? Be it known unto you all, and to all the people of Israel, that by the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, whom ye crucified, whom God raised from the dead, even by him does this man stand here before you whole. They were very bold.
Yeah.
And they preached Jesus. And beholding the man which was healed standing with them, they could say nothing against it. But when they had commanded them to go aside out of the council, they conferred amongst themselves. Reminds me of these little huddles, standing in a group discussing how to deal with this, saying, what shall we do to these men? For that indeed a notable miracle has been done by them is manifest to all them that dwell in Jerusalem, and we cannot deny it. And this is fascinating.
Yeah.
In spite of the evidence,
Yes.
they will deny it.
Even if they say we cannot deny it, they still go ahead and deny
They
it.
still go ahead with it. But that it spread no further amongst the people, let us straightly threaten them, that they speak henceforth to no man in this name. And they called them and commanded them not to speak at all, nor teach in the name of Jesus. But Peter and John answered and said unto them, whether it be right in the sight of God to hearken unto you more than unto God, judge ye. For we cannot but speak the things which we have seen and heard. And that is what we must say to all who have like sentiments. It's as plain as that.
That's it.
Here we stand, we can do no other. We will just have to do it. So, Martin, that wasn't an isolated case, because in Acts 5, it's like pushing the reset button, and you go back to the same verse, right? So then, the high priest rose up, and all they that were with them, which is the sect of the Sadducees, which were filled with indignation. I think indignation is going to be the name of the game, right? Mm-hmm. And laid their hands on the apostles and put them into common prison. But the angel of the Lord by night opened the prison door and brought them forth and said, go, stand and speak in the temple to the people all the words of this life. Go preach the gospel, which is salvation in Jesus Christ.
Go proselytize.
Absolutely. Go and preach. So what do we do with China? What do we do with Confucianism? What do we do with Islam? What do we do with anyone that the Pope embraces and says, leave them exactly as they are? We have to go and preach. An angel came and opened the prison. This must have driven them crazy. Then came one and told them, saying, behold, the men who ye put in prison are standing in the temple and teaching the people. Then went the captain with the officers and brought them without violence, for they feared the people, lest they should have been stoned. And when they had brought them, they set them before the council, and the high priest asked them, saying, did not we straitly command you that you should not teach in this name? And behold, you have filled Jerusalem with your doctrine and intend to bring this man's blood upon us. We told you to stop.
Yeah. Don't say that.
Did they stop?
They couldn't. They got their marching orders from God.
An angel released them from prison and said, go. And then Peter and the other apostles answered and said, we ought to obey God rather than men. And this is the issue, Martin. This is not going to stop. This is not going to stop. So we are going to face this more and more. When they heard that, they were cut to their hearts and took counsel to slay them. So in other words, if you cannot suppress it, eventually you will resort to violence.
That's it.
Right?
It first comes to going personal, and then to violence eventually.
Then stood there up one in the council, a Pharisee named Gamaliel, a doctor of the law. And he had a reputation amongst all the people, and commanded to put the apostles forth a little space. Just take them outside. And said unto them, ye men of Israel, take heed to yourselves what you intend to do as touching these men. And now I say unto you, refrain from these men and let them alone. For if this counsel or this work be of men, it will come to naught.
Mm-hmm.
This is very good advice.
That's it.
This is very sound advice. So all these people that constantly scream about what is being said, if it is not from God, it will come to naught.
Yeah.
Why do they want to follow the way of the Sanhedrin and put these people in jail and command them to be silent when they have a commission sometimes which they feel comes from God directly to preach it?
Mm-hmm.
But if it be of God, you cannot overthrow it, lest haply ye be found even to fight against God. And to him they agreed. And when they had called the apostles and beaten them. Isn't that interesting? They beat them. They commanded that they should not speak in the name of Jesus and let them go, and they departed from the presence of the council, rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer shame for his name. And daily in the temple and every house they ceased not to teach and preach Jesus Christ. Did it work?
No.
No, it didn't work. So my advice to all of these people that want to silence everyone, even if he's speaking contrary to the truth. Do you want to put him in jail? Do you want to beat him? Do you want to stop him? If it is not from God, it'll come to naught.
Testimony and the law.
But if it is according to the Bible and the testimony, they are fighting against God. And no matter how much they beat, and no how much they censure, it won't help, because God's message cannot be suppressed.
No.
You can do nothing against the truth, only for the truth. Their actions, did it suppress the gospel or further the gospel?
Further the gospel.
Why don't they learn?
This has been history.
Huh?
Middle Ages.
Let's take another example. Acts chapter 12 verse 6. And when Herod, who had brought him forth the same night, Peter was sleeping between two soldiers bound with chains, and the keepers before the door kept the prison. They made sure they won't go preaching again, right?
So this is the third time already.
Yes. And behold, the angel of the Lord came upon him, and a light shined in the prison. And he smote Peter on the side and raised him up, saying, Arise up quickly, and his chains fell off from his hands. When Peter was come to himself, he said, Now I know of a surety that the Lord has sent his angel and has delivered me out of the hand of Herod, and from the expectation of the people of the Jews. Now it was church and state together.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it says there, he has delivered me out of the hand of Herod and from all the expectation of the people of the Jews. So the threatenings first came from inside, and later the arm of the state was added.
They get that part where they have to enforce it.
Correct. Now, as soon as it was day, there was no small stir amongst the soldiers. What was become of Peter? And when Herod had sought for him and found him not, he examined the keepers and commanded that they should be put to death. And he went down from Judea to Caesarea, and there abode. Can you do anything against the truth?
No.
No. Did this make the truth even more prominent?
Yes, definitely.
It spread like wildfire. Let's take an example from the Old Testament. Jeremiah. I love the story of Jeremiah. Do you know, Martin, that the book of Jeremiah is a type of the three angels' messages?
Definitely.
You can find all three angels' messages. Get out of Babylon. Flee from Babylon, right?
And the
Run
way
for your lives.
And the way he's treated is also the way people that preach the three angels' messages get treated.
It's a perfect type. And then, of course, he also bemoans the fact that they didn't keep the Sabbath.
Yeah.
So even the third angel's message is in there. Now, we read in chapter 32, For then the king of Babylon army besieged Jerusalem, and Jeremiah the prophet was shut up in the court of the prison, which was in the king of Judah's house. There poor Jeremiah sat in prison. For Zedekiah, king of Judah, had shut him up, saying, Wherefore dost thou prophesy, and say, Thus says the Lord, Behold, I will give this city into the hand of the king of Babylon, and he shall take it. The king didn't like that message, right?
So if you don't like the message,
shut him up.
Kill the messenger.
Then Jeremiah called Baruch, son of Neriah. And Baruch wrote from the mouth of Jeremiah all the words of the Lord, which he had spoken unto him upon a roll of a book. So he wrote out a testimony, and he sent it to the king. And Jeremiah commanded Baruch, saying, I am shut up, I cannot go into the house of the Lord. So Martin, even if you shut up the messenger, does it stop the message?
No, because the message doesn't come from the messenger. He's just the carrier of it.
Correct. It comes from God. So off goes the message. Therefore go thou and read in the roll what thou hast written from my mouth, the words of the Lord in the ears of the people in the Lord's house upon the fasting day. And also thou shalt read them in the ears of all Judah that come out of their cities. It may be they will present their supplications before the Lord and will return every one from his evil way. For great is the anger and fury that the Lord has pronounced against this people. Did they?
Unfortunately, no.
No. But nevertheless, they had to hear the message,
That's
right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether they will hear or whether they will forbear. They had to hear the message. And it came to pass, when Yehudi had read 3 or 4 leaves, he didn't get very far, he cut it with a penknife and cast it into the fire that was on the hearth until all the roll was consumed in the fire that was on the hearth. Yet they were not afraid, nor rent their garments, neither the king nor any of his servants that heard all of these words. It had no effect on them.
No.
But they had to hear.
Exactly.
And those words were not only for that king, they were for our time.
Exactly.
Because it's a type of the 3 angels' messages. Nevertheless, Elnathan and Eliah and Gamariah had made intercession to the king that he would not burn the roll, but he would not hear them. Were there people that were faithful?
Definitely. It's like Gamaliel with Peter.
There's always someone that says, listen.
Mm-hmm.
And nevertheless, they beat the disciples, right?
Yeah.
Even after that advice. But the king commanded Jerahmeel, the son of Hamelech, and Sariah, the son of Azriel, and Shelemiah, the son of Abdeel, to take Baruch the scribe and Jeremiah the prophet. But the Lord hid him. Mm. So now the poor messenger was to be locked up as well, right? So the Lord hid him. Now it's interesting that we drop down to verse 32. It says, Then took Jeremiah another roll and gave it to Baruch the scribe, the son of Neriah, who wrote therein from the mouth of Jeremiah all the words of the book which Jehoiakim, king of Judah, had burned in the fire. And then these interesting words. And there were added besides unto them many like words. I love that text.
Gave a little bit more.
He gave more information. You know, Martin, I find in my own life that this has happened to me many times as well. When I started preaching on secret societies and their role in prophecy, and everybody said conspiracy theory, I was also told by the leading powers in some of the modern Sanhedrin councils that I should cease and desist from preaching these things. And when I was told that, I thought to myself, maybe they haven't got enough evidence. And so instead of 2 lectures, it turned out to be 36 lectures, which was the Total Onslaught series. That's how it developed.
Yeah.
The reason why it developed was because of the opposition. Because I thought, why don't they see it? Let me give more facts. And I quoted from all the original sources.
Yeah.
I quoted from
Albert Pike.
Morals and Dogma. Do you know that one of the leading brethren came to me and said, who's Albert Pike? He's not important at all. So I was in the 33-degree Freemason Lodge in Washington, D.C., where all the important decisions are made. And I ended up in the basement, remember? And I came into the Albert Pike room, which was a museum. And they caught me down there where I shouldn't be. And I said, where's the washroom? And the man shouted at me and said, you are standing on holy ground. And I said, what is holy about this ground? This is the Albert Pike grave or whatever. And I thought to myself, now when people say this is irrelevant, right? So anyway, many a time, this is the experience that God's people have to go through. Here's another quote. We as a people have not accomplished the work which God has committed to us. We are not ready for the issue to which the enforcement of the Sunday law will bring us. It is our duty, as we see the signs of approaching peril, to arouse to action. Let none sit in calm expectation of the evil, comforting themselves with the belief that this work must go on because prophecy has foretold it, and that the Lord will shelter his people. We are not doing the will of God if we sit in quietude, doing nothing to preserve liberty of conscience. When something goes against liberty of conscience, we are compelled to speak. Fervent, effectual prayer should be ascending to heaven, that this calamity may be deferred until we can accomplish the work which has so long been neglected. Let there be more earnest prayer, and let us work in harmony with our prayers. We have a commission, just like the early disciples had, to go and preach. That's the work. What must we preach? The three angels' messages, right?
And if you keep yourself busy with that, you won't be sidetracked or
Correct.
derailed.
Correct. It is our duty to do all in our power to avert the threatened danger. We should endeavor to disarm prejudice by placing ourselves in a proper light before the people. We should bring before them the real question at issue, thus interposing the most effectual protest against measures to restrict liberty of conscience. In other words, the issue must be crystal clear. The choice is between the commandments of God and the commandments of men. The choice is between obeying God and obeying man.
Yeah.
And if the issue is not clearly stated, how can people make a choice? They can't.
No.
It is not enough to merely profess to believe the truth. All the soldiers of the cross of Christ virtually obligate themselves to enter the crusade against the adversary of souls, to condemn wrong and sustain righteousness. But the message of the true witness reveals the fact that a terrible deception is upon our people, which makes it necessary to come to them with warnings, to break their spiritual slumber and arouse them to decided action. Remember, we had a discussion on the true witness?
Yeah,
It's the testimony.
that's it.
I was shown that even this decided message of the true witness had not accomplished the design of God. People pay lip service to the testimony, but they deny the essence thereof. When it comes to the health message, it is a minority that adheres to the health message. They preach it and proclaim it, but they don't adhere to it themselves. The people slumber on in their sins. They continue to declare themselves rich and having need of nothing. Many inquire, why are all these reproofs given? Sounds like the people in the days of Korah, right?
Yeah.
Why do the testimonies continually charge us with backsliding and with grievous sins? It is a backsliding church that lessens the distance between itself and Rome.
That's it.
That's a reproof. We don't want to hear it. Stop this noise. We will not allow you to speak. We will try and get you into prison. We will do whatever we can to silence your voice. Right? We love the truth. We are prospering. We are in no need of these testimonies of warning and reproof. Martin, this is exactly what is happening in the church. We want to be accepted. We want to be part of the crowd.
Yeah.
Let's read one more and then I'll tell you a story. A few persons pass on in a course of wrong until they become hardened. They may even know that the church is burdened, as Achan knew that Israel were made weak before their enemies because of his guilt. Yet their consciences do not condemn them. They will not relieve the church by humbling their proud, rebellious hearts before God and putting away their wrongs. God's displeasure is upon his people, and he will not manifest his power in the midst of them while sins exist amongst them and are fostered by those in responsible positions. Those who work in the fear of God to rid the church of hindrances and to correct grievous wrongs, that the people of God may see the necessity of abhorring sin and may prosper in purity, and that the name of God may be glorified, will ever meet with resisting influences from the unconsecrated. Some years ago, no, in fact, quite a few years ago, I had a very interesting experience in my life. We'd been through a very tough time. My wife had had a terrible fall. She had broken her femur, smashed her hip, and she was in great suffering. And because the entire hip had been crushed, everything was tied together with screws. She wasn't allowed to put any weight on her leg for 6 months, and then she had to learn to walk all over again. And we were in South Africa, and we thought, we'd give time for recovery, and then we will continue with the work. And I was here in one of the northern provinces of South Africa, and we wanted to drive back home. My wife was still on crutches. She could hardly walk. And as we drove home, someone said to me, I should come to Botswana because they wanted me to do some sermons there. And I was with a friend. In fact, it was Francois. And I said to him, I can't go to Botswana now. We've got too many problems. My wife is still not well. She can't walk. I don't want to go to Botswana. We're going to go home to recover. So he said, okay, while you drive back home, I will drive with you until we get to the place where we go north and you go south. But before we got to the place where he goes north and I go south, I was confronted with a situation. I was driving along this road, and there was a vehicle in front of me that was a typical African vehicle. It was held together with band-aids and spider webs, and it was driving along, and I thought, I will have to pass this car. And I still had a caravan on the back, which is like a recreational vehicle, because we were at a camp meeting. And I thought I'll have to pass him, but there was a truck coming from the front. So I was going to wait till the truck was passed, then I could pass this vehicle, which was going very slowly. So I was coming down the hill, and the truck was coming, and I started to accelerate so that when the truck was passed, I would be able to get past him. But as the truck passed him, it created a wind. And this wind was just too much for the Band-Aids.
Oh, no.
So the car in front of me virtually disintegrated from the wind.
From the truck?
From the truck. So the bonnet flew open, the fender flew off, and came hurtling towards us and hit my car. And, of course, because his bonnet had been totally wrapped over his windscreen, this guy, poor guy, couldn't see where he was going. So he stood across the road like this. And I had already accelerated to pass them when this truck was past me. The driver was unaware of what was happening behind him. And so I greeted him with much aplomb, and that was the end of my car. So we had to wait until they towed us in, and I took it to the next town, and we found the insurance, etc. and the insurance wouldn't allow us to have the car fixed in that town. It had to be in another town. In other words, the vehicle had to be loaded onto a truck and taken almost 1,000 kilometers to be fixed in another place. And we were arguing with the insurance company about this issue, and eventually they said, this thing is not going to be sorted out before a week is past. So you just better find yourselves a place to stay for a week. So now what? So Francois said to me, you know what? I'm going north and you're not going south. And I'm going there for a week. So I ended up in Botswana, whether I wanted to or not. So I had plans to go south, but God had plans for me to go north. And broken hip and broken bones, despite, we ended up in Botswana, and we had a wonderful campaign. We had a nice series. And there was a medical doctor there who knew medical doctors at some of our university hospitals overseas. And it so happened that he was a speaker overseas in California. And he ended up there, and he told about the meetings that we had. And so we had an invite to go and speak at one of our institutions. And so we ended up in the United States as a consequence of Botswana.
Exactly.
You see how everything has a twist and a turn? And we ended up there, and we found there, as always, that there were two camps. Those that weren't overly enthused about what we had to say, and those that were inclined to be enthused. So we had meetings in a hall, and there were large numbers of people. And it's actually quite amazing. My poor wife was still on crutches. She was suffering great pain because this whole thing wasn't growing. It wasn't growing back. So there was even talk that they might have to amputate her entire leg. And at this institution, one of the ladies came to my wife and said, I'm impressed to speak to you, because we didn't say much about what happened and what the problem is. And her husband happened to be a specialist in this particular field. And he then gave her certain treatments which were almost miraculous, that really helped her a lot. So God even arranged that. And we had wonderful meetings. And we made many, many friends. But the powers that be weren't happy at that institute. And then one day, we got an invitation to come to the table. Shall we say, to the powers that be. And it was the dean of theology and a member of the General Conference. And it was about preaching to other denominations, in particular Islam. And there was much anger at some of the lectures that I'd given on the issue before, because my lectures made it quite clear that what the other religions teach, including what Islam teaches, is not in harmony with the three angels' messages or with the Bible at all. So we were blasted by these gentlemen and told that we must refrain from speaking to other religions and trying to convince them that they have to come out of her, my people. Exactly the same sentiment as the papacy had, right? So the message, come out of her, my people, was not popular. I still thought to myself, and I said to myself, I was an atheist and I was a Roman Catholic. And I had to come out of her, my people, and join those that preach the truth, right? I had to join the truth. And so I thought to myself, very strange. Because they were telling me that you leave the people where they are. You don't proselytize. You don't do that. It is not necessary. You leave that alone. So I had a little bit of a disagreement with these gentlemen, but they were very, very adamant. So this particular dean, who's also very prominent these days still, preaching a new approach to Revelation chapter 13 as to who the beast is and who the image of the beast is. They have a totally new theology, redefining the book of Revelation, basically to be in disagreement with the spirit of prophecy, right?
It's sad.
To the law and to the testimony. Isn't that important?
Definitely. If you want to preach that, then why not leave this denomination that you can become an object of evangelism?
Correct. So then, after this discussion, I said to this particular dean, I said to him, so are you telling me that I may not preach these things? And I get the feeling that you don't believe even that the papacy is the Antichrist. Because I said to him, there are many things that are correlating between Islam and the papacy. The Immaculate Conception, their view on the atonement. They don't believe in the atonement, just like Catholicism doesn't believe in the atonement. And all of those issues. And he said to me, you may only preach what is in the fundamental beliefs. So I said, but it's very clear that the papacy is the Antichrist in the fundamental beliefs. He said, no, it's not one of our fundamental beliefs. I said, that's very interesting. Anyway, I went home and I made a very thorough study of the fundamental beliefs, and actually he was right on that point in the sense that it doesn't say we believe that the papacy is the Antichrist. It states that the reformers believed that he was the Antichrist. So it implies it, but it doesn't say it. So then
So he actually used that as a loophole.
He used it as a loophole. He distorted it, let's put it that way. But I said to him at a later stage, I said, you know, the spirit of prophecy says, expose the wickedness of the man of sin, and that's in the fundamental beliefs that we believe in the spirit of prophecy. So ipse facto, I must preach it. But if you manage to marginalize, make of non-effect the testimony, then you can get past that one as well. In any case, Francois was with me, and he said, yes, but, you know, evangelism brings people into the church. And these messages are bringing people into the church because it clearly states what the difference is and that you have a choice and people make a choice. And he said, we don't want them in the church. So I said, that's very interesting.
So he said he doesn't want that kind of people in the church.
He doesn't want these kind of people that believe that the papacy is the Antichrist, etc. He doesn't want them in the church. So we were absolutely stunned, right? And we walked out of there, and we looked at each other and said, what is this? What is this all about? And as we walked out, a young man came to us who had been a New Ager. And he said, he greeted us and he said, I was a New Ager, and because of your lectures, I have decided to become a Seventh-day Adventist. And he was so happy and he embraced us. So that's the first one we saw. Then we went to a meeting from there, and we met a geologist and a neurosurgeon who had also accepted the truth. And so God immediately from that situation, do not go and do that, stop this preaching. We met 3 people from all walks of life, from the highest to the general public, that, well, basically testified to the opposite, right? So you have to make a decision. What are you going to do? Now, interestingly, this sentiment has become very, very prominent. Now, that was the dean of one of our largest universities in North America. Now, many of the theologians at some of our institutes have that same sentiment. You don't preach, come out of her, my people. Therefore, Martin, you have to redefine. You totally have to redefine 1844. Because if 1844 tells you that from then onward a message went out to the people by a specific group of people who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus, that specific group will bring a message to every tribe and people and kingdom on the whole earth and to every tongue. And that message is the three angels' messages. And one of the three angels' messages is Babylon has fallen. And the loud cry is, come out of her so that you have no part of their sins, right? So that would mean that there is a specific group at the end of time with a very specific message from God that has to be delivered to all the people. That message runs totally counter to ecumenism.
That's it.
Right? It's the opposite. Now, as we discussed in our previous WhatsApp, there are many of our top echelons that are in the ecumenical movement. So they have to stop this message. Actually, they have signed that this message has to be stopped because there will be no, according to the Pope, proselytizing. Right? And we will not say anything detrimental about anybody else. And so, Martin, I came to the realization that there is a new way of thinking developing amongst some of our leading theologians. And the first thing that they have to do is take away the heat from the papacy. And so they are preaching that the little horn might not be the Pope. Start it gently. That the beast of Revelation and the second beast of Revelation are not what the spirit of prophecy and the reformers had to say on the issue. And that the remnant is not a group that keeps the commandments of God, holds to the testimony of Jesus, designed to call a people out of the other institutions to a unity with God's word and God's law. But there must be a redefinition of what the Adventist is supposed to be. Otherwise, we have no identity. So how do you do this? Now, I was a speaker at another camp meeting in South Africa. Quite an interesting camp meeting because, again, there were two messages. And there was a group of theologians from our flagship university in the United States of America. And they were a group and they were doing part of the camp meeting and I was the other speaker. So again, there were twin messages that were going out. And basically, they were redefining our understanding of Revelation chapter 13. Now, Martin, when you start redefining our understanding of Revelation chapter 13, and you downgrade those powers, such as the papacy and fallen Protestantism, so that they are not what they are supposed to be according to the spirit of prophecy, aren't you then introducing a new doctrine?
Yes.
Now, what that dean had told me, that I may not preach that the papacy is the Antichrist, it's the same as what that representative in Germany had told me. I may not preach that the Pope is the Antichrist. That is the one thing. They also, both of them told me that Allah was exactly the same God as our God. And that kind of teaching also occurs at one of our large universities in the United States of America. Not only that one, but at another one. So this idea that Allah is the same God as the God of the Bible. So as a consequence, I decided to study the Quran. And I studied the Quran from the back to the front, because that's how you read it. And I discovered that the God of the Bible and the God of Islam are definitely not one and the same.
Yeah.
This kind of teaching that changes the purpose of the remnant from a group that calls people out to something that glues everything together is a totally new concept. Now, at this camp meeting, they were preaching that basically what we know about Revelation has been totally misunderstood. And by the way, that dean just recently also gave a number of talks where he basically stated the same thing. So this is not a new thing. It has come a long time. When I studied the Quran, I looked at all the points that they had mentioned. And one of the things is that they seem to lean very heavily on the things we have in common.
Yeah.
All right? So what we have in common is the health message, they said. So I read the Quran. And the Quran says you may not eat pork, right? And you may not use the normal slaughter mechanisms. They're very same as the Bible. That is true. But then when it comes to all the other things, like the unclean animals such as the camel and everything that creeps and crawls in the ocean and all of those things, the Quran very clearly states that those prohibitions were simply for the Jews because they were disobedient, but it doesn't apply to them. It doesn't apply to Islam. So there is no correlation between the health message of the Quran and that of the Bible. They are as far removed from each other as the East is from the West.
That's as good as you say that we're on the same foot as New Agers because they don't eat meat.
Correct. And then if you take the issue of Jesus, they deny the sonship of Jesus. They say Allah has no son. So all of these issues are absolutely contrary to the God of the Bible. Then their doctrine of hell is very similar, if not worse, than that of the Roman Catholic system. So there's absolutely nothing that we have in common with the Quran, even if they thought so. In any case, when I was in the South African camp meeting, and our theologians from our university in the United States were preaching one message, and I was preaching another message, eventually it came to a private discussion. And one member of that team came to the place where we were staying. We were staying in our camper. And they had a 3-hour session with me. And it was very, very eye-opening. They basically said that the remnant, the Seventh-day Adventist, is not an organization that has to call a people out of Babylon. No, we are the glue that will glue the whole world together into unity, because we have so many things in common. With Islam, we have in common that we don't eat pork. And with the rest of the Christian world, we have Jesus in common. Yeah. And with the Jews, we have the Ten Commandments in common. So we have a role of gluing them all together. So the whole role of Adventism has been redefined. 1844 has basically been removed as that time period when the judgment would commence. And I could suddenly understand why it's so important to them that Jesus didn't go into the holy, but went into the most holy.
It sounds to me like when God called everybody out of Babylon to get the Adventist church to go,
Yes.
it's like when he dispersed the languages
Correct.
and they tried to get it back together again. Now you had to come out, now they want to get everybody
Together again.
Together again.
Now, it's exact opposite message. And I thought to myself, this is absolutely brilliant. To totally twist the message around from what it was to what they wanted to become. Martin, this same lecturer reposted an article on a Facebook page where it basically states that I'm a self-proclaimed lecturer. They have basically everything wrong. They made me a professor at Cape Town University when I was not a professor at Cape Town University. I was at the University of the Western Cape. But then they said I was a self-proclaimed lecturer, that I was never employed by the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and that I'm basically a heretic. Now, those statements are quite amazing. In fact, they are libelous. I wonder whether they did a facts check. I was employed by the Seventh-day Adventist Church as an evangelist for 12 years in 2 different conferences. And I'm definitely not a self-proclaimed lecturer in that field. And I'm an ordained minister in the Seventh-day Adventist Church in good and regular standing. So where they come across this information is mind-boggling. And then the heretic part, that's quite interesting.
Well, if you go back quite a few WhatsApp profs, we showed that Ellen White was called a heretic of the week by the Catholic Church.
So in good company.
In good company.
I'm happy to be in good company. And then I was also told, of course, that I should really refrain from this Freemasonry stuff because it was not relevant. So they'd redefined the position of the remnant. And these are the organizations that are supposed to evangelize the world in a totally new way. You don't call people out. You leave them where they are. You don't tell someone from Islam that he has to come out. No, he already has everything. All he needs is to accept Jesus as well, and then we're fine. Then we're glued together, right? And that night, or that afternoon, I had to leave. So we hooked our caravan, our camper, and we set off on our journey of about close to 2,000 kilometers back home. And my wife said to me, you know what? You are inclined to just keep on driving until you drop. I don't want to do that. Will you promise me that when we drive now, when we find a RV park, a caravan park, you will go in and you will please stop before sunset? And I said, sure, I'll do that. I'll do that. We won't drive through the night with this thing on the back of the car. We'll stop. So I said to her, look up on the internet where these parks are and in what towns, and we'll see how far we can drive before sunset. So we got away at about 2 o'clock or something, and I wanted to drive for about 4 hours at least so that we can get a head start. So finally we get to the first town. It wasn't dark yet. It was still around about 4-ish. And she says, let's look for the rest camp. So we looked it up on the map, drove there, put the GPS, put it in, got there. It was gone. It didn't exist anymore. We asked around. No, it hadn't moved. It's gone. The town doesn't have one anymore. Okay, how far is the next town? It's about 100 kilometers away. Let's go. Kept on driving. Now, while we're driving, we're talking about this 3-hour discussion that we had. And we were stunned at what we had heard and how these people think. And so eventually we get to the next town. There was also supposed to be a park. It was gone. It no longer existed. So my wife was getting a little bit agitated. But what could I do? There wasn't one. So I said, okay, let's try and make it to the next one before complete sunset. I think sunset was around about 7 o'clock or something. We drive to the next town, some 80 something or 90 kilometers away. The park doesn't exist anymore. You know, South Africa had gone through so many changes, and there had been such tumultuous times and so many bankruptcies, and they just didn't exist anymore. And the towns had been totally changed. And so we kept on going. And eventually we couldn't find anything. And by that time, when we got to the final little town, it was already 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
And it wasn't my fault. I really, really tried to find a place, but it was obviously also my fault. No, it wasn't my fault. It was a divine appointment. So we get to this town. Now, where is there an RV park in this town? And we get to the entrance, and there's a board up, and it says RV park, and it has a telephone number on. Now it's 11 o'clock at night. So I said, let's phone. My wife says, you can't phone at this time of night. I said, I can. I have no choice. I have to go there. So I phoned this place, and the man answered. And he says, yes, sure. He's got the park up. It's a very small one. It only takes about 3 stands. It only has about 3 stands. But there's no one in it, he said. Come round, we'll open up. But he sounded a little bit inebriated. So in any case, we arrived there, and it was a hotel, but it also had an RV park. So he opened up this RV park, and we went in, and he was flaring his voice, and he was the manager or the owner of the hotel and the RV park. And they'd obviously been sitting in the bar having a couple. So we got out, and I said to him, I'm going to leave early in the morning. Can I pay you ahead of time? And so I paid him, and then he looked at me, and he looked at me in this very strange way. And he said to me, you're Walter Fight. And I said, oh, how do you know me? He said, I watched your DVDs. And then he blasted me. And his tongue was very loose. And he was very angry with me. And he wanted to pick an argument with me. And then he said to me, I am the Grand Master of the lodge for the entire district. And he mentioned all the towns where he was the Grand Master. And I am a 33-degree Freemason. And you are absolutely off the wall. And his tongue was loose. Now, he wouldn't normally say things like that, right? And so I said to him, yeah, well, you have an obvious difference of opinion on this issue. So I really am tired. It's late at night, and I have to drive early tomorrow morning. I'm sorry, I don't have time to discuss this, but he wouldn't let go. So I just started moving away from him, and then he sort of grabbed hold of me, and then he went ballistic against Jesus. And that caught my attention. He went ballistic. Jesus is not the Son of God. He's not God. You Christians have it all wrong. Lucifer is the true Son of God. And he went on and on and on. Everything that we know about Freemasonry in any case. But then he said something very interesting. And we make it our job to prove it to the entire world. And we have handed out to all the Protestant preachers the Quran. because the Quran confirms that Jesus is not the Son of God, neither is he God. That is the truth. So I said, you're welcome to your belief, but thank you, I'm going to go to bed now. And I went inside and I closed the door and he left. I just found it interesting that the very things that they accused me of were confirmed by this man to the negative, right?
Exactly.
He said exactly the opposite of what they had been saying. And I realized, you dare not stop preaching in that name.
Yeah.
And you dare not stop saying, come out of her, my people. We dare not allow our theology to be changed into one of a collective glue. Whereas God says, come ye out and be separate. This is an incredibly important issue. Yeah. And if we stick to the Bible and the testimony of Jesus Christ, then we will understand what the role of the remnant is. Not that we are wonderful, but we are a movement that is to bring a decided message to humanity. And if we do not unite on the Bible and the spirit of prophecy, we will be divided.
Yes.
And just because some of these theologians are the deans and the theologians at our largest colleges and universities, if they start preaching a different message to what the Bible and the spirit of prophecy and the original understanding of Protestantism is, if they start preaching a message counter to that, then they are not in harmony with God's word. And just like the disciples did not listen to what the Sanhedrin had to tell them, so we will not be able to listen when they say, stop preaching these things.
This is not a popular message.
No.
And you won't be popular for preaching it.
No. So Martin, if we can stick to the Bible and the spirit of prophecy, we can be a united church and speak out of one voice.
And then we can stand together against all the accusations and whatever the world will throw at us.
Correct. Now, I was much encouraged after some of our last WhatsApp profs to receive a lot of letters. And you yourself know, we received a lot of letters. And a doctor who had been trained at Lomalanda was very encouraging to talk to him. And he shared some very interesting ideas with me. And one of the things that he wrote to me was this issue of Daniel. He said, let's read it here. He said, the first test that Daniel and his friends went through was on temperance. And it was basically for the church at that time. Because there were approximately 800 people that had been taken captive, right? And Daniel and his friends were the only ones that stood for right and said, we will not be defiled by the food from the king's table. And that was in harmony with Scripture, right? Even Solomon said, if you sit at the king's table, put your knife to your throat, lest you succumb to those delicacies, right? So the first test was a test for God's people.
Yes.
And it's a very poor ratio that we see there. 4 of them.
It's important just to bring it out that you can read it in the Bible and also the spirit of prophecy, especially in prophets and kings.
Yes.
It shows this because maybe a lot of people will not understand this, but though that 10 days, they were compared to their kinsmen, not to the Babylonians.
Correct. They were compared to their kinsmen that had come out in that captivity or that been taken captive. So this first test was on the health message. And 4 of them stood for the truth. right?
Mm-hmm.
So this was a test within the church. And I thought he made an excellent point there.
Yeah.
A test for the church. The next test was on worship.
Yeah.
So the second test was on worship, and it involved the whole nation. Because everybody had to bow down to that image, right? How many did not bow down? Now, Daniel wasn't present.
No.
He was in another province at that stage. So only the 3 friends refused to bow down. Now, that's a very poor ratio, Martin. So all of those that had been taken captive, what did they do? They weren't thrown into the fire.
Yep. So they bowed down.
They bowed down.
And where did it start?
It started with temperance.
Temperance.
So the first test is a test on the health message. The second test will be a test on worship. Now, we spoke a little bit about COP26. Now, COP26, Martin, as you know, stands for Conference of the Parties. Conference of the Parties. That's the parties that signed the climate accord. Now, that took place in 2015.
Yes.
When Laodiceans came out.
Mm-hmm.
Now, next year, 2022, will be the 7th year
Yes.
since that signing. In the meantime, of course, Donald Trump had taken the United States out of the accord, and Joe Biden had put them back into the accord. Now, we discussed what will happen at COP26, right? And the basis for the discussion, according to John Kerry, will basically be Laudato Si, right? So I wondered, Martin, can we rephrase COP26 as Conference of the Pope?
I don't think it's that far-fetched, because all of these leaders, including the spiritual and the world leaders, have gone to him for the spiritual and their marching orders, as to say.
Correct. So they all first convened at the Vatican, and then they go over there, and the Pope is, without a doubt, the main spokesperson. So I think we can call it the Conference of the Pope, COP26. COP could also be an acronym for close of probation. Now, we're being a little bit pushy here, but should they come to an accord that it is necessary to shut the world down one day in 7 in order to save the planet, then we could see the beginning of interesting things, which could lead to a loud cry, which could lead to the close of probation, right? Martin, is it important that the debate as to whether we believe what the testimonies have to say and whether we believe that they are in absolute harmony with the scriptures, that debate should take place before the close of probation?
Yes. It might be the most important decision of someone's life.
Correct. But there will be voices that say that preaching what we are preaching is divisive.
Yes.
And the papacy has directly said that it must be stopped. These evangelists that use the networks to preach the message, right? And this proselytizing must stop.
Yeah.
Now, we've seen that sentiment has crawled into the echelons of our own denomination and is being propagated by people in high places. I have personal experience of that. I'm not making this up. Now, Martin, I can't recall that I've changed my tune over the years. I believe what it says in the Great Controversy. It's one thing paying lip service to the Great Controversy, and another thing believing it.
Yeah.
Why is it that when lay people take that book and hand it out in any great numbers, there's always a hue and cry about it?
I don't know, because every time when you hand out that book, you get people that come out of Babylon.
It is a given. It must be handed out like the leaves of autumn. If it leads to a shaking, then we will have a people with a unified voice. So, Martin, what will happen unto this event which we call the shaking? These truths must be debated.
Mm-hmm.
Decisions must be made by people, whether they want to run with the come out of my people theology, or whether they want to run with the let's glue ourselves all together into a collective unit.
No.
Those are two different gospels, right?
That's it.
So let's read a few statements in the spirit of prophecy and then we'll wrap this up. Truth, present truth for this time, is to be believed and acted upon in connection with the principles of health reform. That is exactly what happened to Daniel.
Yep.
And Daniel was written for our time.
Mm-hmm.
The sanitariums which are established are to be closely and inseparably bound up with the gospel. The Lord has given instruction that the gospel is to be carried forward, and the gospel includes health reform in all its phases. Our work is to enlighten the world, for it is blind to the movements which are taking place, preparing the way for the plagues which God will permit to come upon the world. God's faithful watchmen must give the warning. Those are our marching orders.
That's it.
Many will tell us to desist.
Mm-hmm.
Many will threaten. And there will be many discussions as to how to silence this movement. If it is from God,
Mm-hmm.
it cannot be stopped. If it is from man, it will lead to nothing. And then comes the shaking. The mighty shaking has commenced and will go on, and all will be shaken out who are not willing to take a bold and unyielding stand for the truth and to sacrifice for God and his cause. The angel said, "Think ye that any will be compelled to sacrifice? No, no, it must be a free will offering. Any form of compulsion, coercion is not from God." So what is it that makes us want to preach? The word of God is a fire, and you cannot keep silent.
Definitely.
It will take all to buy the field. I cried to God to spare his people, some of whom were fainting and dying. Then I saw that the judgment of the Almighty was speedily coming, and I begged of the angel to speak in his language to the people. Said he, "All the thunders and lightnings of Mount Sinai would not move those who will not be moved by the plain truths of the word of God, neither would an angel's message awaken them." Some people are so hardened in their thinking. Korah, Dathan, Abiram. All the evidence in the world didn't change them.
True.
And even when God intervened,
Yeah.
nothing.
Even if you take the other quotations that we had from the Bible, when Peter and them, they even said they are convicted, but they still beat them and threw them out.
It's amazing. I asked the meaning of the shaking I had seen, and was shown that it would be caused by the straight testimony called forth by the counsel of the true witness to the Laodiceans. In other words, the true witness to the Laodiceans will tell the church exactly where she is not in harmony with the Bible and the spirit of prophecy.
That's it. And it's not smooth words. So it's not words that fall soft on the ear.
No.
You have to change.
And what did those people say when Korah and Dathan and Abiram were swallowed up by the ground?
It's your fault.
They thought they would bring about a new dispensation. None of this, you have to do this and you have to do that. That is thinking exactly like the Pope thinks. This will have its effect upon the heart of the receiver and will lead him to exalt the standard and pour forth the straight truth. Some will not bear that straight testimony. They will rise up against it, and this is what will cause a shaking amongst God's people. I believe we are there, Martin.
I think it's culminating. And the final act of this shaking will surely commence when these laws on Sunday and Sabbath are started to be implemented.
Absolutely. I never, in my wildest dreams, thought that I would ever have to have a discussion like this one. I always had the hope that it wouldn't come to this. But it's a vain hope, because the Bible and the spirit of prophecy tells me there will be a shaking. I mean, Ezekiel is very clear on the nature of the shaking and how drastic it will be.
Ezekiel, isn't that also telling us of the about 25 that has their
backs to the temple? And what were they doing? They were doing sun worship. Now, 25 elders, it's interesting to me, Martin, that it says about 25 elders had their back towards the temple. Let's not go into the details of that. But there are some very interesting thoughts that crop up when you read that. Here's another statement from 3rd Testimonies. God will not be trifled with. It is in the time of conflict that the true colors should be flung to the breeze. It is then that the standard bearers need to be firm and let their true position be known. It is then that the skill of every true soldier for the right is tested. Shirkers can never wear the laurels of victory. As we see these things happening, we are admonished to lift up our voices like a trumpet.
That's it.
We cannot be silent. If it is not in harmony with the Bible and the spirit of prophecy, then we should have nothing to do with it. And if it is in harmony and we embrace it, then we will speak with one voice.
That's it.
Those who are true and loyal will not conceal the fact, but will put heart and might into the work and venture their all in the struggle. Let the battle turn as it will. God is a sin-hating God, and those who encourage the sinner, saying, "It is well with thee," God will curse. It's exactly what happened in Korah's rebellion. Now, Martin, there were 250 princes involved in that rebellion, men of renown. When we go to the book of Daniel, 4 of them stood for health reform.
And they were also princes coming out of Israel.
And there were 800 of them, and 4 of them stood out, and 3 didn't bow down. That's an incredible statistic. Colossians 2 verse 8, "Beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ. For in him dwelleth all the fullness of the Godhead bodily. And ye are complete in him who is the head of all principality and power." And then from the Desire of Ages, the church is built upon Christ as its foundation. It is to obey Christ as its head. It is not to depend on man or be controlled by man. Many claim that a position of trust in the church gives them authority to dictate what other men shall believe and what they shall do. They told me that in so many words. They told me what their positions were and what my task was, namely obedience to their dictates. Contrary to the Bible and the spirit of prophecy? Never. This claim God does not approve. The Savior declares, "All ye are brethren." Upon no finite being can we depend for guidance. May God give us the courage. May God give us the wisdom to understand His Word. It's not enough to have a head knowledge.
No.
We have to internalize it. You have to eat the flesh and drink the blood of the Son of God.
If that, either one of those books tells you, don't do this or do that, then embrace it. And
Not
don't
out of
kick it.
fear, not out of fear,
No.
but because you understand the issue.
And you want to do it. You want to change. You want to be what God wants you to be.
I cannot wait for the kingdom of God. And in a sense, I'm saddened when I see these things happen in the church. But I'm also at the point of wanting to rejoice because I know that the end is near and that the suffering on this planet will finally come to an end. I see so many people that are cast down. We need to be comforters. We need to lift people up. We need to give them hope. But to give them a false hope is something that God will not tolerate.
It's so dangerous if God, Jesus, is on his way to tell somebody, no, it can maybe be still for a while. Don't do that.
No, let's preach the gospel irrespective. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, the conflict is raging. New ideologies are taking the place of the old. And there are champions that want to enforce their new ideologies. Help us to cling to a "Thus says the Lord." In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you for watching this video. To subscribe, click here. When the bell appears, click again to get notifications. To watch the next video, click here. Thank you.